Okay, to recap what happened last week, talk about basically the consequences of incompatibilism. If incompatibilism is true, the following things happen. We have, on the one hand, Campbell. Campbell says morality requires free will. Morality requires free will. And that's true, that's why it's in black. Free will requires choice. You have to be able to choose, and you have to be able to have been able to choose otherwise if you'd so chosen. Being able to do otherwise if you so choose. Then we have this myth, incompatibilism. Determinism rules out choice, creating the further myth that determinism rules out free will. This fantasy is so deeply embedded in our society that many people think that the word determinism just means the denial of free will, which is like saying that the meaning of the word basketball is the denial of our ability to make cheese. Well, I can't make cheese, but the denial of the human ability to make cheese. On the other hand, we have Skinner. Skinner believes that humans are predictable. There is a lot of predictability in human life, and this is true. We have this thing called the science of psychology and the science of sociology. If human behavior was not predictable, those things wouldn't work. They would not be able to be accomplished. We would not be able to have psychologists and sociologists. There would not be any point in studying human psychology if people were not predictable. This is another. Predictability implies determinism. If a system is not deterministic, it cannot possibly be predictable. Right? A random systems cannot be predicted. The amount of randomness in a system will degrade its predictability. If you want a system to be predictable, you want to eliminate sources of randomness. Okay. Skinner agrees with Campbell that determinism rules out free will. He subscribes to the incompatibilist myth. Now, Campbell believes that because Campbell subscribes to the belief that determinism rules out free will, he draws the inference, which would be correct if this was true, that determinism rules out morality. Now, from this, we have to ask, which of these two things has to give way? We have all this evidence that human beings are predictable and therefore determined. We have tons of evidence for human determinism, human volitional determinism. Anyone who doesn't think that we have this evidence has to show how you can predict the behavior of a system that operates at random. We can predict human behavior. That is evidence that determinism is true. But we have no evidence that morality is real. Okay. Is that Joanne just came in? And that Aurelia? And Bao? Anyone else just come in? Oh. What is the evidence for, what is the inference from this? We have overwhelming evidence for determinism. We have no evidence that morality is real. And if we accept the belief that determinism rules out choice, therefore ruling out free will, therefore ruling out morality, the only conclusion that can be drawn is that morality doesn't exist. Now, remember, the true stuff here is in black. The reliable premises are in black. These are things you can't mess with. If you think that morality doesn't require free will, explain how. If you think free will can exist without choice, explain how. If you think humans are not predictable, explain how we can have the science of psychology. Are they all just making that stuff up? If you think predictability does not imply determinism, explain to me how you can predict the system, the behavior of a system that is inherently random. We have overwhelming evidence for determinism. If determinism wasn't true, technology would not work. That camera would not work if it was not a deterministic system. My computer would not work. My car would not work. If your car lost its determinism, you would not be able to get about in it, and it would be highly dangerous to even get into it, because it could randomly burst into flames. That's what randomness means. That's what indeterminism means. Things just happen out of nowhere. Unpredictable, uncontrollable, just strung together at random. Well, if all the red stuff is true and all the black stuff is true, morality doesn't exist. That is the only conclusion that can be drawn from Campbell's argument. Okay, now, there's two things I want to talk about to get us started today. First, I'm going to give you the contrasting view. I'm going to give you the accurate view, and then I'm going to tell you what is wrong with Campbell's argument. What is wrong with this incompatibilism thing, this idea that determinism rules out choice. So, actually, I'm going to knock this down first, then I'm going to give you here. Anyone else come in while my back was turned? Yes. Jerome and Mark. Okay. Now, let's examine Campbell's criteria. Could have done otherwise. How do we interpret this? You go into the ice cream store. You order chocolate. Now, I say that act is free-willed if nobody made you choose chocolate. It was open to you. If you had decided you wanted vanilla, you could have said vanilla and gotten vanilla. If you decided you wanted gorilla, you could have said gorilla and gotten gorilla flavor ice cream. If you decided you wanted asphalt or Cherry Garcia or I don't know, what napalm flavor ice cream. It would have been there for you. If you decided that that's what you wanted, you could have said that. You happened to decide you wanted chocolate, and so you asked for chocolate. That makes sense to me. But that's not what Campbell says. Because Campbell thinks that free will, that determinism, rules out choice. That is, if your aims and purposes in life, if your personality, your history, you, how you are, your preferences, your desire for something cold, your liking for chocolate ice cream, your dislike for other flavors, or your at least a mild preference for chocolate over other flavors. Campbell says that if your preference for chocolate determines that you get chocolate ice cream, that's not free will. For Campbell, it's only free will if you want chocolate and that doesn't determine what you get. You want chocolate, but instead of choosing chocolate, you choose something at random. Hit me in the face. Do a little dance. I burst into flames. Right? Well, try about choices. So think about all the things that you could say to an ice cream salesperson, a scooper, instead of chocolate, please. Think of all the things you could say. If each of those is equally likely, that is, you are just as likely to say, ooh, that's an ugly hat, then chocolate, please. If you're just as likely to say that when you want chocolate ice cream, then Campbell says you have free will. Just randomly. But, of course, the fact that you choose chocolate ice cream when you want chocolate ice cream means that you don't have free will for Campbell. And it says you're not acting randomly, because over and over and over again, you do what you want. You don't act randomly. This is what's wrong here. Determinism does not rule out choice. If you have a deterministic system in your head that determines what you choose, if your preference for chocolate ice cream leads you to order chocolate ice cream, that doesn't mean you could not have chosen vanilla. What does it mean to say I could have chosen vanilla? Does it mean I chose one thing and I could have chosen another? Or does it, I could have chosen chocolate given that I chose vanilla? I can do chocolate and vanilla at the same time? Or it could have been random? Or does it mean that if I had decided I wanted vanilla, I could have asked for it? Free will exists when you don't have a gun to your head. Determinism does not put a gun to your head. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about David Hume. According to David Hume, free will exists. An action is free-willed if it was determined by an internal process, a process that went on in you. If it's determined by the operations of your volitional system, and you can identify it as representing what you want, representing what you decided to do, then it's free will. When your decisions determine what you do, you act on free will. When someone else decides for you, when someone else decides and makes you follow through on his decision rather than yours, you don't act on free will. Freedom of the will means you're not coerced. The will part has to be determined. What this means is that we have no reason to think that morality is unreal. We have no reason to think that morality is unreal. Because morality requires choice. Choice requires free will. Morality requires free will, but we can have free will. Free will is not ruled out by determinism. In fact, morality requires determinism. Suppose that we have randomness bugs, right? Little bugs like mosquitoes. And we're doing our best to eradicate them. We're destroying them as much as we can. But we haven't finished yet. We haven't got them all dead. And they're wandering around randomly, biting people. And every time they bite someone, that person does something at random. So you suppose you find yourself in a bank. And one of these things bites you and you act randomly, and your random action happens to be to rob the bank. You had no intention of robbing the bank. No intention of robbing the bank, but the randomness bug bit you. You did something at random, something you didn't decide, something nobody decided, that wasn't decided. It's completely causally, there's a causal gap between what you do and what was going on before. And you just happen to rob the bank. Are you morally guilty of that? It just happened at random. You didn't choose to do it. Your body sort of did it out of your control. You're going, wait a moment, where did I get that gun? Would you think that in those circumstances you had acted on your own free will? Would you think that in those circumstances you would be morally responsible for robbing the bank? You didn't decide to do it. It happened as though randomness is just like coercion, because it creates that causal gap between your actions, between your preferences, your decisions, and your actions. If there's a causal gap between your decisions, your mental processes, and your actions, you have no free will. That's what coercion does. Coercion creates a causal gap between what you decide and what you do. Causal gaps destroy free will. They destroy moral responsibility. Just remember this handy phrase: determinism does not put a gun to your head. Right. Okay, so any questions so far? Is this making sense? Is this too boring for words? Are you sick of hearing this? I'll take any feedback. I bet if I gave out an evaluation right now, some of you would write, he's a bit too needy. I'm now going to give a fair and balanced analysis of some arguments against self-determinism, arguments against Hume. What I just gave you was self-determinism. Self-determinism says free will exists and volitional determinism is true. You have a deterministic system that determines what you want to do, what you decide to do, and sometimes that system controls what you do. Right? You make decisions. There's a deterministic system inside your head making your decisions, and it so happens that a lot of the time you are allowed to carry out your own decisions. Nobody puts a gun to your head. Right? Some things you don't do of your own free will, but mostly you act of your own free will. Determinism is true, free will exists. That's self-determinism. Now I'm going to give you a fair and balanced analysis of the arguments on the other side. I said it was fair and balanced. I didn't say it would be nice. First, okay. Well, the first thing that Donald Palmer does in the book about self-determinism is that he ignores self-determinism. There's no reference to Hume. There's no reference to self-determinism, no description of self-determinism in the book. The word self-determinism is applied to the doctrines of the Stoics and St. Augustine, neither of whom were self-determinists. The coincidence of will and desire says, you know, whatever's going to happen to you happens. You might as well enjoy it. You might as well like it and say, this is what I want. If you say this is what I want, well then, you got what you wanted. This is an utterly bizarre piece of ancient reasoning that's kind of what the Stoics believed, but it's not self-determinism. Self-determinism says you have real free will. You have real control over your actions. A system inside your head, which I call the volitional system, generates volitions, generates decisions that you try to put into action. Right? You have a will. And sometimes, in fact, most of the time, you get to do what you want. What the Stoics are talking about is very few people get to do what they want. What Augustine was talking about, very few people get to do what they want. So you might as well want what you get. It's a different subject. It's a different philosophy. It is not it is not self-determinism. In philosophy, this is called the straw man fallacy. And the thing that I most want to convey to you, and the reason I told you not to read that part of the book, is that Donald Palmer ignores the correct definition of self-determinism and brings in some ancient thinkers who have nothing whatsoever to do it. The Stoics and Augustine were talking about happiness. The Stoics were talking about being happy in a world that doesn't treat you very well. And Augustine was talking about being free will in the face of the fact that God determines what your fate, in the face of predestination. But determinism is not unhappiness. Determinism is not predestination. It's a completely different thing. So this is the straw man fallacy. And the unfortunate thing about this part of the book is that Palmer does not argue against the correct definition of self-determinism. You have free will. You have free will in exactly the same sense that the libertarians believe you have free will. Self-determinists and libertarians have exactly the same definition of free will, except that the libertarians seem to sometimes think that you only have free will if your actions are random. Free will exists when your actions are random. Puzzling theory. Claim that there's no evidence for determinism. Okay. I am going to give you some evidence for determinism. See this chair? Now, I'm a determinist. I believe that the state of this chair at this time determines its state in the immediate future. That is, the laws of nature, as I understand them, say that this chair will be just as strong 3 seconds from now as it is now. Okay, this state determines what it's going to be like when I sit down. Now, does anybody here have any doubt that the chair will bear my weight? Does anyone here have any doubt that the chair will remain a chair? Perhaps it'll turn into a turkey, or a monkey, or it'll burst into flames. It'll run around the room on its legs. Right? If you believe those things are impossible, then you are a determinist, because that belief requires acceptance of determinism, at least as far as this chair is concerned. Okay, so here's the test. I will attempt to sit on the chair. If determinism is true, the chair will support my weight. Gosh, what an amazing result. I never expected that. one of the most bizarre things that the Palmer says in the book is that you look around and you don't have any evidence for determinism. Right, buildings turn into cantaloupes, trees sprout wings and fly away, the road dissolves under your feet all the time. Random stuff happens all the time. Completely, and I mean really random, not unexpected. Right? Something's unexpected, that doesn't mean it's random in this sense. It doesn't mean it's undetermined. It just means you don't know the process that determined it. You know, you know about automobile accidents. When there's an automobile accident, two vehicles try to occupy the same space at the same time. And it seems random to us. But if you ask the drivers, what were you trying to do? Why were you there at that time? There's a chain of events that leads up to it. Each step in the chain causes the set of events after it, and so on and so on. I ran into my daughter in Julia. You know, she was with her mom. I'm divorced. I had no idea she was there. You know, but there was a chain of events that led up to it. It was unpredictable, it was unexpected, but it was not undetermined. So, we have unbelievable evidence for determinism. It's very, 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 very hard to set up a situation where something you can see, where you can see the effects of quantum indeterminacy. It's very, very hard. Atoms behave deterministically. To create that indeterminism, you have to go down to the level of electrons, and you have to separate them out from everything else in the world. It's very hard to do. Oh, please. Anyone notice a stupid mistake here? What is it? The coincidence of will and what? It's not will and desire. That's silly. How many of you have noticed I've written something stupid? How many of you noticed but don't want to embarrass me? I say you all want to embarrass me. I don't have my textbook with me. Does anyone have a textbook? I'll say necessity. We have almost nothing but evidence for determinism. I mean, I've never been in a laboratory doing the two slits experiment. Actually, the disentanglement experiment. What the hell is the name of that experiment? The one where you send particles randomly different directions, and that's indeterminate where they are. I've never been in a lab for one of those, and I wouldn't know how to interpret it. Right. Palmer says it like this: determinism is a theory, and theories are meant to be, I don't know, theories are meant to be descriptions of reality. They're not reality. They're meant to be, well, okay, yes, determinism is a theory. Quantum mechanics is a theory, which requires determinism to be true. Newtonian mechanics is a theory, which requires determinism to be true. Every scientific theory we have requires determinism to be true. They're all deterministic theories. That's why we have the theory of determinism. People looked at scientific theories and said, hey, wait a moment, this implies determinism. Yes, it's a description of reality, and it's an incredibly good description of reality. Our experience is that things happen deterministically. Every time somebody does something that you could have predicted, that is evidence of a deterministic process going on in the brain. When people don't do what's predictable, when people act against what you think their personalities are, that is not evidence of randomness. I mean, it might be random because you don't know what's going on. But it could also be that a more complicated process that you knew about, the more complicated process is going on inside that person's head. Have you ever done something that other people didn't expect? Did you experience it as, oh my God, I don't believe I did that. Why did I do that? What went on in me that I did that? I have no idea. There's nothing about me that explains what I just did. If it was random, you would have had to feel like that because it would have been so out of the ordinary. It would have been so unexpected. It would be like, that's not me. And if you'd had that, wait a moment, that's not me, that doesn't mean it was random. That just means that there's some process going on that you don't understand, which could be deterministic, could be random, but it could also be deterministic. Because deterministic processes will provide unexpected results. Usually it's very hard to predict things. Most deterministic systems are unpredictable. Large, complicated deterministic systems are unpredictable. And your mind is one of the most complicated systems in the universe. So the idea that determinism is a puzzling theory is ridiculous. I'm going to do the heroin addict one right now, and then I'm going to do the moving finger. Now, in the text, there's this one segment, one sentence, slam against soft determinism. It says that if soft determinism is true, a heroin addict freely chooses to engage in his addiction. There are several things very wrong with this. The first thing that bothers me is it's not really an important point, but it mistakes the nature of addiction. Can anyone tell me the most addictive substance that is in common use in the United States today, perhaps in the world today, the most addictive substance that is in common use? You know, if it's something that's very, very addictive, but only a few thousand people do it, I don't want to hear about it. Right. Yes?
Cigarettes?
Cigarettes, yes. 60% more addictive than cocaine. By far, the most addictive substance in common use today is cigarettes. It's much more addictive than heroin. According to, I mean, there are people who go through withdrawal symptoms. Yes, going cold turkey on heroin is extremely painful. The withdrawal symptoms are extremely painful and unhappy. But that's not why addicts stick. That's not why heroin users stay with heroin. A sociologist, a psychologist, or somebody interviewed a bunch of heroin users, and they were in prison. They'd all gone through cold turkey. They'd all gone through the shakes and everything. And they all said when they get out of prison, they're going to go back to heroin because they like it. Somebody once interviewed a drug addict, a drug user in a nasty part of a big city. And he said, you know, why do you do drugs? And he says, you know, do I want to live with this? Looking out at the wrecked buildings and the dirt and the squalor. I mean, do I really want to be experiencing this all the time? So this doesn't really matter for the example because I can use cigarettes. I knew a guy who told me he quit smoking for 3 years, and he said, every minute of every day for those 3 years, I wanted a cigarette. So there is definitely an addiction there. Most people become addicted when they're young, when they're teenagers or young adults, and the usual thing is that they get into it because their friends are doing it. They tell themselves, I can quit anytime, I can quit anytime, I can quit anytime, and then they're 30, 35, 40, and they're still smoking, and they smoke the rest of their lives. You know, I've known people who were hooked on ciggies by the time they were 22, and there's people who get hooked earlier. It depends on when you start smoking. So think about a cigarette user. I'm going to mock smokers. Any smokers in the room? I don't want to be trying to make you feel bad. So sorry. And I think it's shameful that our society ghettoizes smokers. They don't give you a comfortable place to smoke. So like, you've got to go out and be 50 yards away from the building. Give me a break. 50 feet, sorry. You know, in the rain. One of my colleagues here smokes, and when it was raining, I used to come in and out of the building, and he'd be standing under the awning there smoking. It's like, yeah. And the sign said, you have to be, there was a sign there that said it had to be 20 feet away from the building. If he'd been 20 feet away from the building, he'd have been soaking wet. There wasn't anywhere to shelter. So, you can't smoke indoors. No. Anyway, so we're mean to smokers, and that's wrong. But I think that what happens with a smoker is they really want to quit. And that's another thing that came out of this study that said heroin users stick with heroin because they like it. Smokers tend not to like it. The people this guy interviewed, most said, I don't like smoking. I don't like being a smoker. I can't stop. I can't stop. The cravings are strong, and I find myself just lighting up. And when I light up, I know I don't want to do it. And there's this little mental gymnastics that lets him do it. That I don't want to be doing this, but I'm doing it. Has anyone here quit smoking or tried to quit smoking and failed? None of you smoke. That's great.
I thought you smoked.
Second?
I thought that you smoked.
Yeah, I had 12 cigarettes in 2004. And I had a cigar 2 months ago. Heavy smoker. And I won't go into other substances. But so it's like something inside you is making you do it. If you ever found yourself giving into an impulse that you know you shouldn't, I really don't want to do this. Well, I'll just do it this time. I'll do it for 10 minutes. I'll just have one. Before you know it, the whole packet of cookies is empty. You've just eaten a gallon of ice cream. Now, what does soft determinism say about this? Well, Palmer says if soft determinism is right, according to soft determinism, you're acting freely, right? You take that cigarette because you have no choice. If you don't take the cigarette, your head will explode. Palmer says, look, soft determinism says that that's free will. Right? You're freely engaging in your addiction because it's a coincidence of what you have to do and what you don't want to do. Well, does it work in coincidence? It's not coincidence of will and necessity. Oh wait, maybe it's desire and necessity. It's not the coincidence of desire and necessity. You guys, when the addict takes that cigarette or that cookie or that potato chip, when the person who's addicted and who cannot control himself takes that cigarette, he doesn't want to, right? That's why we say he's addicted. He wants to quit. He wants to be a non-smoker, but he's smoking. So there's a determinism here in the sense that he's lost his free will. Okay, he's lost his freedom of action. There is a biological coercion. There's a system inside his body that is making him do this against his will, against his desire. So desire and necessity are opposed. In the addict, desire and necessity are opposed. So this doesn't work even against the straw man. Now, doesn't work against the straw man. Does it work against real? I'll do that in green, if I've got green. Incidentally, is a smoker or an addict morally responsible for his actions? Is he morally responsible for smoking? I offer that as an open question because I don't have a ready answer. There's a couple of ways to go. you could say, well, let's just say it's an alcoholic responsible for drinking. One of the usual ways of interpreting this is to say an alcoholic might not be morally responsible for getting drunk, but he is morally responsible for getting in a car when drunk. If an alcoholic places himself in a position where he was going to get drunk and then he's going to drive, he's morally responsible for putting other people at risk. Is he morally responsible for taking that drink when this addiction overpowers him? This is why Alcoholics Anonymous and so recovery people define alcoholism as a disease, because it allows the individual to see it as something outside himself which he as an individual can overcome. It's a form of coercion. It's something to be fought against. It should not be taken as an excuse, but it is a form of coercion, an outside thing. So Alcoholics Anonymous, recovery people, they see alcoholism as a disease, an outside force, a coercion. But other people see drinking as a moral lapse. As usual, South Park had a good episode on this. Stan's dad has a drinking problem, so he decides he's an alcoholic and that he has a disease, so that he needs to be cured, he needs a miracle. And Stan says, no, you choose it. It's a moral lapse. It's something you do. You're responsible. So, if you see people as responsible for drinking, that they really are morally responsible for taking that cigarette, if you can look at someone who's a smoking addict and takes one more cigarette, you say, you did that of your own free will. Yes, it would have been extremely hard to refuse, to not do it. You were under enormous pressure to do it, but you did it over your own free will. Now, if you see addiction that way, addiction as a series of choices, albeit under pressure, then they did it of their own free will. And it was an internal process, and you are counting the addiction as part of that person's choice process, as part of that person's volitional system. So, now, does anyone here think it's at least reasonable to see alcoholism as a disease, as something that's external to the real person? Because if you see it like that, as something the person is struggling with, as something that's breaking down the real you, then you see the disease as being outside the volitional system. If you see it as a disease, then you see it as outside the volitional system. So the answer to this problem depends on whether you see the addiction as part of the person's volitional system, as part of what makes the person the person. If you know someone who's an alcoholic, and you think that alcoholism has taken over the body and erased or controlled the person, then you see the volition, then you see alcoholism as outside the volitional system. If you know someone who's an alcoholic and you see them as freely choosing to drink, then you see the alcoholism, what other people call a disease, as part of that person's will, as part of the process that determines what that person is going to decide to do. So, the way to analyze this attack on self-determinism, first, ask yourself, do you personally think that an addict freely engages in his addiction? If you think he does, then the addiction, the compulsion, is part of his volitional system for you. That's part of the person for you. You are drawing a line around the addiction and around the personality, both in there. The addiction is part of the personality. If you see the addict as not freely engaging in his addiction, if you look at that and you say, well, of course, it's a disease. The addict is not acting freely. Maybe he did a past that created this situation, but he's not acting freely now. Then you draw two circles. There's the personality and the addiction. And the addiction is overwhelming the personality. It's taking away the facility of choice, taking away freedom. Okay, now on Wednesday I'm going to do Palmer's moving finger argument. And it is an argument for the claim that free actions are undetermined. So it's going to be the whole lecture is going to be on that. I'm going to try and show you how I'm going to try and make that argument as strong as possible. Because I actually think it's an interesting argument. But I want you to think about, just read the book, read the moving finger argument. Okay. Thank you all for your attention.